So comedies end in marriages. Tragedies end in death. That's the equation. It's pretty simple. It's straightforward. Measure for Measure ends with marriages, probably 4 of them. Therefore, it's a comedy. Also, the original publication of the folio in 1623 had it categorized as a comedy, so if the perception of the play within the culture that it was produced means anything at all, then we should take them at their word. It's a comedy. Moreover, the protagonist, Isabella, gets nearly everything that she wants at the end of this play. Her brother is pardoned, she's preserved her chastity, she's formed a meaningful female friendship with Mariana. It's a happy ending. It's a comedy. Right? Yeah, it ends with 4 marriages, but let's take them one by one. Claudio and Juliet seem like a happy couple. They seem mutually committed to each other. They're probably going to be okay. Angelo and Mariana seems less okay. Seems Mariana is committed to Angelo, but it's messy. He abandoned her when, through no fault of her own, and with great personal tragedy, she lost her dowry. After that, she tricked him into bed with her. This is not exactly a foundation of trust. Additionally, the source of Angelo's power, his perceived virtue, and his reputation with the Duke, they're both gone. So this doesn't feel like a happy marriage. The next marriage is Lucio and Kate Keepdown. She became pregnant with Lucio's child over a year ago, and he abandoned her and the child. After this abandonment, it seems that she found work in a brothel, and the child has been raised by Miss Overdone. Lucio, in the end, is ordered to marry Kate because, measure for measure. If Claudio has to marry Juliet and Angelo has to marry Mariana, then Lucio must marry Kate Keepdown. When given this news, he says it's like pressing to death, whipping, and hanging. It's a fate worse than death for Lucio. We don't know how she feels. She has no lines in this play. And while the play often seems critical of strict legalism, this belief that law should be applied strictly and that individual cases can be tried with the same set of laws, even with the inevitability of diverse contexts, the ending of this play and the forced marriages applies the same logic. If Claudio is pardoned, then Angelo and Lucio are pardoned. If Claudio marries, then Angelo and Lucio must marry. Measure for measure. But the application of the decisions made in Claudio's case to the cases of others, it just seems flawed. Claudio and Juliet have mutually desired marriage. Only Mariana wants marriage in her union, and I see no evidence that Kate or Lucio particularly want marriage in their case. These are different situations, probably needing different solutions. But I don't know. Which brings us to the 4th marriage, the maybe marriage. We don't really know how Isabella answers or behaves in the end, but if it is a marriage, it's a complicated one. She's been groomed and coerced into this position by a powerful man who has done little more than lie to her at every single opportunity. So yeah, it ends with marriage, but they're not happy marriages. The most charitable reading of these weddings that we can give is that they happen but aren't celebrated. They aren't the consequence of love, but policy. The most cynical reading of these marriages would be to take Angelo and Lucio at their word and view these marriages as literally worse than death. Tragedies end with death, and so this is worse than a tragedy. So maybe this is a tragedy embedded directly into the structure of a comedy. The distinction between comedy and tragedy asks us to assume marriage is the opposite of death. But this play blurs those lines, complicates that equation. To dig into this question a little deeper, let's consider a popular interpretation of this play that posits that the Duke fancies himself a playwright, or that Shakespeare wrote the Duke to represent the role of the playwright in culture, whatever. Let's read the play considering the Duke as an allegory for the role of the writer in culture. In the opening scene, the Duke says that he doesn't like applause. He wants to leave the stage. He assigns Angelo to the role of administrator while he slips away to write the scripts backstage. In assigning Angelo to this role, he wants Angelo to be somebody who acts the laws as they've been written. He wants somebody who will bring the words of the law to life, link action to verbiage. He is cast to play the part of the Duke. In Act 2, the Duke does a little bit more casting and tells Juliet that he will teach her and Claudio how to behave. He'll help tell their story, write their lines for them, give them their entries and exits. In Act 3, he arranges the bed switch, gives everybody their lines that they're supposed to say, tells everybody how the set is to be composed, By the time we get to Act 4, Mariana and Isabella are straight up rehearsing the lines the Duke has given them and saying that they have their parts when referring to their upcoming performance in the final scene. And Act 5, we can see as the play itself. Everything has been choreographed and written down by the Duke. He has arranged a comedy for his audience. It has all the dramatic action of a theater production, a play where social order is restored, death is avoided, and everybody in the end is married. It was, and perhaps still is, popular to think of literature as a moral force in the world, that a play should be didactic, both entertaining and instructive. About a decade before Measure for Measure was performed in London, Sir Philip Sidney's Defense of Poetry was published. It argued that the role of poetry is to instruct the audience in virtue. Ben Jonson, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, also frequently made this argument. Plays serve a social function. They provide moral instruction. And in Measure for Measure, this seems to be exactly what the Duke is trying to do. He's writing a play that will restore social order. He's using the stage as a place of moral instruction. Everybody has learned to judge not and practice mercy. Vienna will be better because they've learned about the responsibility they have to each other regardless of the laws. He aspires to create an authentic sense of community. And did he do it? Can theater serve this role? I don't know. I don't think he did. A famous reading of Shakespeare's tragedies, typically associated with the Shakespeare scholar A.C. Bradley, holds that Shakespeare gives his characters a fatal flaw and then puts them in the exact situation that will expose that flaw. It's easy to see that this is exactly what the Duke does to Angelo. He even says in Act 1 that Lord Angelo is precise, stands as a guard with envy, scarce confesses that his blood flows, or that his appetite is more to bread than stone. Hence, shall we see, if power changes purpose, what our seemers be. He's putting Angelo in a position that he expects will expose and manipulate Angelo's flaws. He's setting up a tragedy so that he can save the day in the end, positioning the playwright as the hero, the one who restores order and brings people together through marriage. So maybe the answer to the question of whether or not this is a comedy is, yeah, it's a comedy, it's just a bad one. The playwright messed it up, and the playwright is the Duke, and in doing so, the playwright, one level up, Shakespeare, has criticized the comedic form and the view of humanity embedded within it. He's undermined the perception that playwrights can be the purveyors of moral instruction, undermined his own role in society. The question, who among us is virtuous enough to judge others, is adjacent to the question, who among us is virtuous enough to instruct others. It's a messy play, and there isn't much moral instruction to be found in it. Basically, nobody is living happily ever after here, so those lessons of mercy and judgment don't exactly lead the characters to paradise. Not in this play, not through the instruction of a flawed playwright. And before we end this season, let's take one last look at the messiness of this play through the character of Isabella. Isabella, like the Duke, is critical of the brothels and sexual permissiveness in Vienna generally. She aspires to opt out by joining the strictest monastery that she can find. But through the play's many substitutions, we learn that nobody can opt out of this social fabric. She's tethered to the social world through the bounds of family, particularly her brother. She's ultimately successful at saving her brother, but in the process, she's been manipulated by men in power. First Angelo and then the Duke, into abandoning her plan of joining the nunnery. She's not permitted to seclude herself. So the Duke, the playwright, the lawgiver, is critical of brothels, but seems equally critical of nunneries. So perhaps there is a path of moderation. That's usually how these things go, right? There are two extremes, and then there's a Goldilocks state in the middle that is the right answer, a middle road between the brothel and the nunnery. Perhaps that middle road is marriage. But again, these marriages aren't joyful. The marriages she's surrounded by at the end are punishments. Isabella at the end of the play is asked to subjugate her own autonomy and virtue to patriarchal power. No matter what decision Isabella makes at the end, this isn't a happy ending. So it seems like, in my reading throughout this series, that the Duke is just incompetent, morally insufficient to the task, and a sexual predator. And yeah, that is how I read it. I think all of that is true. But also, we can find a little bit of virtue in him as well. He seems to have a bit of that Lucio energy that I appreciated in the beginning. He can recognize the faults of others and love them anyway, extend mercy anyway. He pardons Barnardine, an act of unqualified mercy, perhaps because he recognizes that Barnardine can punish himself in ways that the state that he cannot. Barnardine's prison is like Satan's hell in Milton's Paradise Lost. Whichever way he flies, he's in hell. Barnardine is hell. So a brick-and-mortar prison is of no consequence here. Additionally, the play revolves around the assumption that a woman who has lost her virginity isn't desirable anymore, and the Duke is the one who demands that the men in this play just get over that. He tries to use the law to force Angelo and Lucio to take responsibility for the promises that they made and let go of these unreasonable purity standards. So I guess the Duke believes that the state, through laws and so on, can help make people better people. Help them be more like the people that they want to be, that they intend to be, to bridge that gap between our intention and our reality. The Duke's moral compass is all over the place. He is deeply problematic and deeply human, because those two identifiers, problematic and human, they make the same claim. To be human is to be problematic, and this is true of your favorite writer as well, whoever that might be. And that's how this one ends. And these are all the reasons this play is considered a problem play. It's a comedy critical of comedies, and cynical about the possibility of happy endings and middle paths. A play critical of the role playwrights have in culture. A play filled with flawed humans who love other flawed humans. It's a comedy trying to avoid tragedy. It's a tragedy trying to force itself into a comedy. And that's the end of this first season of Shakespeare Play-by-Play. Full bibliography in the doobly-doo of every video. We'll start this up again in September with Season 2, where I'll read and analyze The Merchant of Venice, which is another problem play. Please subscribe if you want to be notified when that season starts. Thank you for watching.